Now the fundamental components, the actual data coming in, can update the model, can update the construct. And so it's not that there's some fundamental unit of truth existence that you have to come into contact with. It's just that there's a trend towards being able to more and more not hold on to anything as if it has inherent meaning. Any narrative, any mental construct, any thought, any emotion, any ontology, any view of the world. And so the mind is much more dynamically updated. You don't even want to talk about it.
You tell me, man.
Just the list that I have, it's on my phone.
It's on your phone? This is why writing is really good. I mean, from memory, what do you remember?
I had this interesting realization, or I guess thesis, let's say, about the way that the end of the second Mahamudra map, or maybe the beginning of the third one, where you reorient to the grounded ground. The Mahamudra path, or the way that Dustin framed this for me, was to do it and let go. And then it goes away, occasionally just check on there's the metaphor of striking the bell, right? And letting it vibrate for a while. Then, if I'm doing that continuously, it was like a continuous movement of taking away attention from anything that's still trying to use attention to spin and construct. And it trends even, it trends much more significantly towards distribution and eternity. Attention has a much harder time holding. And I realized, I was listening to some Frank Yang video, the recent one about twins, where he was saying that towards the end of his path, he was impersonalizing everything, 24 hours, like the entire universe. And Daniel told me the same thing. Daniel Ingram mentioned the same thing to me towards the end of his path. It was just walking through life and tearing everything down continuously. And I would not say that when I'm doing this, I'm tearing everything down continuously. It's a little more gentle than this, but it's like there's no part of the space that's not aired out. It's like every part that's still more solid, even if I'm doing this, it's a little more vacant, porous, expanded. It's like I'm heating it up and particles of it just dissolve through the process. So I wonder if it's the same thing. I wonder if it's the same practice, walking around continually personalizing everything. If you look at it from the Theravadan point of view, versus the reorientation to the groundless ground from awake awareness, unmediated awareness. Like when you're already stabilized outside, beyond self, subject and object, you can really do it all the way, even effortlessly.
Well, I think one question arises, which is, what does it mean to vipassanalyze an experience? What is it that's going on there?
And that's something that I've been writing about a lot, because I think generally the way that people conceive of vipassana is as skillful as it can be. Okay, so you see now, if I had the student here, someone was asking, I would have a lot of motivation to like give the whole spiel. But now I'm sitting with you, I'm like, I feel like it.
I'm a student of yours, so go ahead.
Normally when people speak about Vipassana from the perspective of Theravada, it's this attempt at seeing through, let's say, course level meaning or mental construct to get to more direct perception of reality, so to speak, or to see the three marks of existence. And there's the assumption that just seeing those marks, so to speak, or seeing the more rapid rising and passing of sensations is somehow enough to enlighten the mind. And here I think the conception of emptiness is a little closer to what I think, like to the paradigm that we can use now to describe the process, which is all phenomena is mental construction. Nothing has any inherent essence or meaning. It's not interdependent, rising based on causes and conditions, receiving its meaning in a completely subjective, relative way. And then when we use the skillful views, when you do the practices and adopt the perspectives that allow us to see not just the layer of meaning, but also all the underlying components, then through the seeing of the underlying components that are otherwise blocked through the perspective of just the meaning or just the construct, the porousness or transparency, now the fundamental components, the actual data coming in, can update the model, can update the construct. And so it's not that there's some fundamental unit of truth existence that you have to come into contact with. It's just that there's a trend towards being able to more and more not hold on to anything as if it has inherent meaning. Any narrative, any mental construct, any thought, any emotion, any ontology, any view of the world. And so the mind is much more dynamically updated. And in the process, it really appeals on and lets you release and not rely on so much on more gross constructs that are just artifacts of early development that were never looked at again. Well, Daniel was speaking about much more precise terms of mindfulness, continuous contact with six sense doors, three characteristics. Having complete awareness or near complete awareness of the fundamental sensations or mental components. Sometimes I like saying mind atoms. Of all phenomena continuously. I think the difference between the Theravada approach and the more Vajrayana approach, the Mahamudra Dakshin, in Theravada, there's I don't want to say nothing, because in some places in the sutras there's undirect meditation and so on. But there's so much of an attempt of striving towards loosening everything, dissolving, seeing the three marks and so on, versus the Mahamudra approach, which at some point and progressively throughout the path, more and more just as you rest into the things. Which I think is also where the instruction comes from. It's just reorient and sort of glide on it instead of be more forceful in trying to resolve everything. Because you run the risk of having a very subtle self-agenda striving to be in the background. You're not really achieving. You might even just create more karma if you're trying to break down other karma, resolve.
Yeah, I often find that when anybody tries to discuss the three characteristics, there's a like, oh, I have to look for the three characteristics of the experience rather than just allowing them to reveal themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's that process of trying to look, they always confuse with investigation as a, let's say, as an enlightenment factor in a Theravada tradition or an awakening factor. But investigation, which comes from the word Dhamma Vichaya, I look at as just understanding things as they arise, or just seeing things as they arise. Mm-hmm. And so like a process of doing something, like you said, it engages with this sense of self, or I am doing something, rather than
underlined by the craving for some awake state in the future.
Exactly. Instead of just, in some sense, being passive, but attentive to what's going on. And then sankharas kind of just rest on their own. And then you start to see for yourself, so to speak, the experience of the three characteristics. You know, it's interesting because even the concept, it's a concept, the three characteristics are a concept, that they arise and pass away, that they are prone to suffering or subject to cause suffering, mm-hmm. and that they are not me, not mine, not myself. And so there has been a tendency among students to be like, okay, I have to see the arising and passing away of phenomena. And when they're doing that, there's still a sense of I, or a sense of me, looking at the experience. Mm-hmm. And so that just creates another layer of like, like you said, like a craving for that awakening. Yeah, that's also craving, like existential craving.
Of course, the notion of anicca, things coming and going, presupposes time.
Yeah.
The notion of having to find not self presupposes self.
Yeah.
And the notion of all phenomena leading to suffering presupposes suffering. Which is why I have a lot of resistance to these notions being called marks of existence. I don't know if this is just like really bad translation, or just
well, the Pali is Tilakkhana, or the Sanskrit is three lakshana, and three is of course three, and lakshana is sign. Lakshan is a sign.
So where is existence?
Yeah, exactly.
Existence, so mark as much as truth. The framing that I enjoy more for this sort of thing is that there's skillful views. Mm-hmm. And just like any other view, you have to know where and when to put it down.
Yeah.
Generally, what I appreciate about the path of Mahamudra is taking up of more and more subtle views as you go deeper down the path, which is explicitly stated. And so there's also an epistemology that's much more neatly stated and acknowledged and expressed, in that all of the practices, in some sense, all meditation is views. You take on some perspective, and then it filters all incoming phenomena, conditioning sensations in a certain way. And some views, some practices lead towards liberation, lead towards seeing things as they are, so to speak, or seeing things in a less constructed way, allowing you to update your model. And then at some point, it is useful to see all conditioned phenomena as causing tension. Right? You take it on and you see the truth in it, so to speak, or you see the way that looking that way, arising phenomena, can inform some of the models that are just not aware. All the stuff they're projecting into awareness is causing more tension and mount. Yeah, there's a lack in all Theravada traditions that I practice with, of a realization that if you have a collected, stable mind, just resting will trend towards liberation. Nothing more to do, nothing more in particular to see, nowhere to go, nothing to do. And I'm curious what you think. Why is that? How is it that this is not a major emphasis? There's so much emphasis on meditating and practicing.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of not doing anything, or there's nothing to do, as you say.
It's this idea of getting to the point in your practice when you're collected enough, when the body is online, when you have transcended the subject-object duality, and awareness is just holding itself, so to speak, without things egregiously hijacking, pulling you, this and that, where it's just possible to let go. Doing, non-doing, or whatever you want to call it, the undirected, the signless.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I talk to twin students, especially more advanced practitioners, so-called advanced practitioners, oftentimes, we see them going through, the first 4 jhanas, and they're doing this and that, their mind gets collected, and then they go into infinite space and so on. And there's this one part where they go into, which is called neither perception or non-perception. And that's where the mind becomes very, very quiet. And it's difficult to give plain instructions, although the most plain instructions I could give to them then is, don't do anything. And then what happens is, there's a tendency to say, okay, I have to do nothing. But if you go back to like the Theravadan Pali Canon Suttas, there are steps into understanding this process where you realize, okay, the disenchantment and dispassion really equate to where the mind remains at rest, unaffected by the pulling here or the pulling there, or going in this direction, looking at this. And so, just going a little before that, we were talking about, the 3 characteristics, or, the Vipassanalizing things. Actually, the path is right there, which is the mind becomes quite collected. And there are some preceding elements before that, but the mind becomes quite collected. And as a result of that collectedness, it goes into what's known as Yata Bhuta Jnana Dasanam, which means seeing things as they actually are. The knowledge, yeah, it's perfect. Like the knowledge and vision of things as they actually are. Which means that there's nothing you have to do there. As things are revealing to them, as they're being revealed, your mind is just seeing things as they are. You don't have to look for them. You don't have to okay, now what do I see? Now what do I see? Your mind has become very let's say spacious and relaxed, but collected enough to be attentive to what's going on. And so as a result of that, there's the experience of disenchantment and dispassion, where the mind just lets go of all effort. And in letting go of all effort, that's the disenchantment. It stabilizes in this presence of mind that remains unaffected by any kind of experience and remains in that. And the final step there is vimukti, liberation, and the knowledge that the mind is liberated.
What do you mean when you say unaffected?
Meaning unmoved by an experience. Yes, there can be other experiences going on. Like, for example, if somebody was in the 8th jhana, there were all of these sankharas coming up in the form of patterns and things like that. They just see that, but don't grab onto it.
In my experience in those spaces, very openly last collective. It's not so much that the mind is necessarily unmoved. It's just that fewer and fewer movements have the capacity to obscure awareness. And that even gives the capacity to see even the most major movements of craving as they are. Right? Because if the craving takes you into lack of awareness, you're not seeing its component. You're treating it as face value. You're buying the story, so to speak, or you become the story, right? Become the self that is exercising the craving. From the perspective, sometimes even, like if I have this thought, the mind needs to remain still, then I will slowly be blocking these very fundamental deep movements that, when they're fully allowed, and the system can hold them, right, can reflect the movement to itself into the rest of the awareness, then the fuel can be charged. And the thing can really exhaust.
So I totally resonate with what you're saying there, because that, well, I shouldn't say should. We don't want to should ourselves, but it's like the mind, like for example, when you're in the signless awareness of mind, there's no real object there. That's why it's called signless. It's objectless. However, there's stuff coming up. And in my experience, when I was in the silence, experiencing the silence, in the seeing of whatever movement was coming up, there was also liberation from that. Nothing to do. So it's, in a sense, the very seeing of this discharge of craving or whatever is coming up, let's say, liberates itself.
I want to just comment on Yatha Bhuta and Yanadatana, seeing things as they are, because this is something that trips me quite a bit in my past. I mean, never fully, but there was always like a sense of doubt. Like maybe there's a more fundamental reality, maybe there's an actual something that's seeing things as they are. What would that even mean? I mean, there's always a perception, even if it's not through conditioning, or like the, what we call conditioning, dependent on karma and the taint and so on. But again, the seeing things as they are has more to do with the mind not being grabbed or grabbing by mental contact, by some reified form. Right? I think this is crucial, because, some of our students that have passed by and had the switch to be able to see things as they are, so to speak, are like, and you tell them, you're doing it, right? They're like, oh, what? No, this is just this? This is it? Like they're looking for, I don't even know what, right? Yeah. But if you think there's a seeing things as they are, so there's like something in the back of the mind, like, can I, what, like the atoms? What would I be seeing?
Yeah.
Turns out it's the same stuff, just with less of the warping, obscuration,
right?
That then conditions perception towards seeing things in terms of how, in some past, we were conditioned to see them.
In the suttas, they have another kind of way of looking at it, or it's the same kind of description. It talks about, Majjhima Nikaya 1, it talks about how an Arhat or a Buddha would experience the world. And it says that he would see earth as earth, but not earth in relation to earth. So in other words, like just seeing without projections, let's say, of concepts that are overlaid on them.
But even that is idealistic.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that very misleading?
Yeah. That's why it's very, you should be very careful how you explain this to students.
Like if you do completely deconstruct the mind, like go over everything with a mental lawnmower, right? And leave just basic sensory contact.
Mm.
There's a way that you could say you could see Earth without relation to Earth, but then also you would not even see Earth. You would again see bleeps and bloops.
That would be the thought that will come up.
The thought Earth. But yeah, like if you release, like allow consciousness to come up, you'll see Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, Earth is already in relation to what is not Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, like the ultimate goal here is not to be some robot only interfacing with sensations, right? So I don't understand why they went so extreme in the sutras in this way.
There's another one, the Bahaya Sutta, which, I often quote. In the seeing, there's only the seen. In the hearing, there's only the heard. In the sensing, there's only the sense. Mm-hmm. In the cognizing, there's only the cognized. When there's no you in that, then there's no you before that and by that and so on. Just that is the end of suffering. But it's interesting because when you read the suttas, there's a tendency to look at it and be like, okay, so what does that mean? In the seeing, there's only the seeing. So I should just be seeing. I should just be hearing. Yeah. But then there's just an I that has to see it. Yeah. So language is very tricky there.
And so to complete that thought, it's not even about not seeing things in relation, forever abiding in some state of emptiness, non-conceptual silence and stillness. It's losing the mind, developing beyond the capacity to make the fundamental mistake of not seeing that mental constructs are created by mind atoms, by sensory components, sensory bits continually changing, vibrating, moving, even as we entertain things as solid. Mm-hmm. For whatever purpose, right? Holding things as solid for a moment. It's very useful. I want to pick up my sandwich and take it to my mouth, right? Maybe for that I don't need a concept. If I want to tell you I want this sandwich, it's good for us both to hold that solid for a few moments. And at that point, it doesn't even become a choice. It's not that I'm choosing to reify a bunch of sensations for a second. The machinery of this being is already magnificent in its ability to do that without needing top-down continuous instruction for the thing that pretends to be in control continually. And I wish this all was better expressed. The way that we are refining our system to do what it already does really well, with fewer and fewer bottlenecks, like energy kinks, places where the information is not flowing well, places where stuck mental concepts are tying up resources of the system and kinking up the pipes.
Yeah, I think it should be noted that it's definitely not about seeing the atoms, or any kind of underlying reality. The matrix.
So much of our desire to see a different reality, to see the matrix, is trying to escape existing suffering.
Yeah, it's another kind of craving. It's craving for non-existence.